Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Marilyn. I'm an alcoholic. And my sobriety date is July 21st, 1985. And I am proud to say I have never relapsed. And some of the story that I will tell is a miracle that I didn't. The gentleman ahead of me said he was trying to reduce an hour talk into 30 minutes. I'm trying to reduce a 76-year story into whatever the time, 30 minutes it says up here. So you're going to get the Reader Digest version. In fact, yeah, my story goes on and on. And in fact, it starts before I was even born. My mother was paranoid schizophrenic, and I picked up her fear in the womb, and I came out a fearful child, and through all the abuse in childhood, just made it worse. So I didn't have a very healthy start, and I came into an alcoholic family, so I was predisposed. I was a sitting duck when I got here for alcoholism because it runs in the family deeply. Plus, with my mother being mentally ill, I had 2 strikes against me from day one. I know that as a child, my father being an alcoholic and my mother being mentally ill was not a very nurturing growing up situation. I was never loved as a child. My mother couldn't give me love because she never got loved herself, I know today. And the 2 of them had such horrendous histories, which I understand today, that they were, my father was deep in fear from his experience of coming to this country. He mentioned history. And I've never said this before, but my father left Russia. He was born in 1896, and they were fleeing Russia before the communists were taking over. And my grandfather was already in New York trying to earn money for the family to come and join him. And my grandmother had 8 children to flee the country when he sent the money. And they left one night through a swamp. It was being patrolled by Russian soldiers, I guess you'd say. And if anything stirred in the water, they shot it. So here my grandmother has 8 children, 1 in arms, and the kids were given the fear of you-know-what, because if the boat came by, they had to submerge and use reeds to breathe from. Can you imagine keeping a baby quiet through this? The kids had to be perfectly still or they wouldn't have made it, but they did. My dad was 5 years old at the time, and that fear lived with him for a long, long time. And I know that today that was a lot of his drinking, was being so scared. His mother put the fear of you-know-what into those kids to get them out of the country. So he had nothing but fear in his childhood growing up, and my mother was very, very abused from a family of 8. My grandmother raised them during the Depression as a single mother, and so there was a lot of difficulty in finding places they could afford that was safe and healthy for that big a family of girls. And so it was a traumatic childhood for her in many ways, which I won't get into. And so they found each other. Isn't that funny how people with traumatic backgrounds find other people with traumatic backgrounds? So here I am, this little child, and scared to death because from the very beginning there was abuse, and they fought every night. And that was my lullaby. I would go to sleep in the bedroom with the door shut, listening to them fighting. And if he would come home from work, and if he didn't like what she cooked, then that was his excuse to go off and go drinking. And if dinner was acceptable to him, then he just went drinking after dinner. So it just was a matter of, that was not a very comfortable environment. I didn't feel loved. In fact, one night the door wasn't shut, and this is when I was 3 years old, and I saw him beat her up. Now, when you're that young and you're that scared, it's like you still have the umbilical cord to your mother. And it was like I was being beaten up too. And I went into a turtle shell. I didn't even know about praying, but that's basically what I did instinctively. I knew they weren't there for me because they were taking care of their battles, and I was, on my own, 3 years old. So I said, God, please take me off the face of the earth. I didn't want to be around that. Didn't know in those days that was a suicide prayer. And I said, if I have money, I'll make it. Because I knew you had to eat. What's a 3-year-old going to do for food? So, long story short, and I also tightened up my muscles really, really tight because I thought if you got smaller, then my dad wouldn't find me to beat me up too. That was my fibromyalgia I discovered, is I got rid of that. As I discovered in my recovery that wanting to be off the face of the earth, every drink I took was another nail in my coffin. It was part of my death wish. I didn't know drinking was part of that until I went through the steps. So here I am. I'm in this emotional little turtle shell growing up, totally isolated from people because it's not safe to be emotionally open. Nobody in my house was sane. It says being returned to sanity. I was not raised in sanity to be returned to it. I am just now getting sane, people. I was raised in a crazy, dysfunctional family. And when my mother left, got a divorce, she married a man that was sicker than she was. I know today. And I literally became a real Cinderella. We actually had ashes at our house I took out. And that was just the simple part of it. He was, for various reasons, I won't get into all the details, but he was a very mean and angry man. I believe he was a closet alcoholic, just because of the way things turned about. If you didn't do what he wanted, there was a price. And one morning, I was in junior high school, and I was really exhausted. But see, I'm Cinderella. I'm to do all the chores, right? My half-sister got all the goodies, but I did all the chores. And I was really tired. I was this really good student because I'm hoping they'll recognize me, that I'm a living, breathing person. And so we're studying hard for good grades, and I'm in band and I'm in orchestra in rehearsals in the evening and still studying late at night, trying to get all my eggs together so I look good to everybody. And I'm really tired and never, ever was able to sleep in. And so one Saturday morning I decided, I'm so tired, I think I'll sleep in this Saturday. Well, the rule in the house was you get up Saturday and you do your chores before noon. And here I am, exhausted, really. And he comes in with a pitcher of ice water, pulls back the covers, and dumps the ice water and ice cubes on me. And I'm soaking wet, and of course I got up. And I did the chores. Now, the rest of that part was, you can't go and play until the chores are done. And so here it's noon. Well, the chores aren't done, so you got to still do this. Okay, so then I get that taken care of. Well, there's still some more chores, and there's always more chores. And by the end of the day, I never went off and had fun because there were still more chores to do. They never ended. I'm still learning. When I first got here, one of the slogans was, "Are you having fun yet?" And I'm just learning to have fun because I've always had to work, always had to take care of those things or get hurt. One day, to this day, I don't know what I did to upset him, but he beat me with a 2x4 bigger than he was, and I'm screaming, what in the world? I'm trying to be perfect so I don't get hurt, right? And I'm screaming, what did I do wrong? He says, well, I'm only doing this because I love you. So here I am, before he came along, if parents fight every night, and that's called adulthood, who wants to grow up? So I didn't want that in my life. And then if somebody hitting you is love, Didn't really need that, thank you. So I had a lot of lessons that helped my alcoholism. I needed to numb my feelings so I could survive. I tried so hard to be noticed by my family in a positive way, I ended up being valedictorian, and they never did give me a present. See, the mantra of my stepdad is, we don't spoil Marilyn. And I'll have to say God spoils me really good today. Made up for all of it. So the only way to get out of that house and all the abuse, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, even though I went to church and I was confirmed in the Lutheran church and I went every Sunday, I had a little pin for perfect attendance even. 10 years, perfect attendance. But I never learned in church what I've learned in AA. Thank God for AA. So my only way out is to go to college. And so my mother decided where I would go. I was a very good victim, and I was always told what to do. And I would just say, yes, sir, because I didn't want to be hurt one more time. And she decided I would be a teacher, and she decided I would go to Western. And off I went. I'm a good little obedient child. And lo and behold, I met somebody up there who I could visit with and talk to, and we seemed to be able to get along really well. He was in the music department, and I was a music major too, and we'd run into each other in the music building all the time. And one night, he was in his apartment, and I was there, and we were drinking. And while we were sitting on the floor under the table, I can't even remember. But there we were, sitting under the table, drinking away, and he's telling me all his childhood abuse. And my heart just leaped right out. I have enough love for both of us, and I'm going to fix him. And I was hooked. And so we went together through the rest of college, and his rage was getting to the point where I couldn't handle it anymore, and I wanted out of the engagement. And I discovered, the week I was going to break up with him, I discovered I was expecting. And in the 50s, an unwed mother was the scum of the earth. So social pressure was so strong in those days that I decided that I would get married, and then I'd get a divorce, and then I'd be unmarried. I'd be a divorced mother with a child. That was a step up the rung of the problems in those days. Now they're on the reality shows, and it's no big deal. But that's where it was for me. So, my story is I went down the aisle expecting to get a divorce. I don't think anybody's ever said that one before. So here I am in this situation, and 6 months into the marriage, I'm strangled and raped. And after that, I was just a real good servant, and the money was his, and I did all the work. Or most of it anyway, quite a bit of it. So that got worse and worse with time with our drinking. Things were getting so bad I was ready to leave him at one point, and he'd been to a psychiatrist and gotten Valium. So I decided if he could go get help from a doctor, I'd go get help from a doctor. And guess what? In the 70s, the doctors, and Maureen will understand this one, the doctors thought you had Valium deficiencies when women showed up for help. So what I found out in treatment was one pill and one drink is 6 times the effect. And I didn't have to consume a lot of alcohol. The pill helped a lot. So we had our little girl, and then our little boy came along, and things just got worse and worse over time. He jumped over a king-size bed and strangled me one time, so I couldn't get out the door to leave. So things were not very pretty. I went to school and taught through all this. I looked like the really good teacher and the really good mother and the really good housekeeper. My house is so clean because I'm trying to be a good person. I actually went into the refrigerator with Q-tips, and the corners of the refrigerator were clean. And I did spring house cleaning every Saturday to make sure that my house was clean, so when you showed up, you knew I was a good person. But nobody ever showed up. Maureen understands that one too. The thing is, I've learned today that a lot of things about why all of this came together. And so things got so bad, he was trying to kill me. And I was trying suicide to get out of it. I didn't really have any answers. I had stopped growing up at the age of 3 when I saw my dad beat my mom. I just emotionally stopped growing. And the alcohol was numbing me so I could be a good zombie and walk through all the stuff I'm going through. And so the night of our bottom, we were coming home from Harrison Hot Springs because we'd stopped drinking for 3 weeks and things were going really well. And he decided cocktail hours, we should celebrate 3 weeks of what a good situation, how things were working out better. And he took a drink to celebrate, and his personality changed just like that. He not only was an alcoholic, but I also know today he was a psychopath, sex addict, rageaholic. So there were a lot of issues going on in our relationship, why it was so hairy. And he was going to kill me on the way home from Harrison. That was his plan. I was so scared because he'd tried it before, but that night I knew I was not going to get home alive. I knew. Now, when I went to church, all the prayers came out of the hymnal, but that night it came out of my heart. I didn't even know what I was saying, but I was saying, God, please help me. I really don't want to die. Within a short few minutes, he was off the road, passed out over the wheel of the car. And I'm sitting there like I'm a pincushion. I am so full of anxiety. And I felt like I was just full of fear. And this is in the middle of the night. We're still in Canada. So I thought to myself, my plan was to get out of the car at the border and get out of the mess. And somehow he must have read my mind. Somehow he always seemed to know what's going on with me. So when he came to in the morning, he says, and you're not getting out at the border. So we stayed at the border. I was locked in the car. He made sure of that. And so he wanted coffee, and we stopped for coffee, and I left a note at the cash register. Literally, there was a person next to me who wrote the note in the bathroom. That's how scared I was. And I left the note by the cash register for help. And about 5 minutes later, after we leave the restaurant from coffee, we're stopped by the police. And more police came. The Border Patrol was there, 2 police from Sumas, 2 police from Linden, and they were all standing over there discussing whose jurisdiction I was in. And the Border Patrol decided they didn't want any part of it, so they left. So then Sumas and Linden decided that I was actually still in Sumas. So the Sumas police took me back to their station. And one of the reasons I felt I could get out of the situation is that night at dinner, he had given me grocery money, and I didn't usually have money. And I thought I had some money in my purse. Well, while the police were checking things out with me, he had taken the money back out of my purse, and there I was without money in Sumas. I called my son, and he came from Puyallup and drove up and brought me home. I stayed with my minister's house for a place to go. That happened actually a couple of times I was there. And had restraining orders and divorce papers ready to go in case I needed them. You know, I needed them years before, actually. But that time I was the first of 3 times I finally got out of that mess. And so with the restraining order, he moves out, and I move back into the house, and he calls me. And he says, I need to talk to you. And I says, well, you're not supposed to be talking to me because we have this restraining order. And he says, well, then just listen. So what he had to say was, I've been going to AA, and good wives of alcoholics go to Al-Anon. So that was my July 15th, 1985. I went to Al-Anon. It was my birthday, my belly button birthday night. And so I'm definitely trying to be a good wife, right? So I'm at Al-Anon. Found myself a sponsor, and she says, Marilyn, you're sicker than the rest of us. You're going to have to go to family treatment. So this is how God got me intervened. I go to Puget Sound Hospital, and I talk myself into the family treatment program because he won't go to treatment. And after 3 weeks of program there, I don't graduate. They kept me for alcoholism. I was intervened, and there was a big room full of people, and that's what it was. It was an intervention, and I didn't go home. And I stayed overnight for 3 more weeks in treatment for alcoholism and discovered a lot of things, because in my family growing up in the 40s, alcoholism was not a buzzword. We never talked about it. Nobody was considered an alcoholic, even though everybody sat around the table and drank, you know. Alcoholics in the 40s were men that had bottles in brown bags and trench coats, and they sat on the bench in Pioneer Square, and that was called an alcoholic. And of course, all my aunts were drinking like mad, but what their comment was, well, the men are the alcoholics, you know, not the women. And so when I was a kid, I looked up in the cupboard, and my stepdad had booze up there. And I thought, gee, that's the worst thing that could ever happen to a person, would be to be an alcoholic. You want to know something? It's really the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because when I got here, thanks to God getting me into a program to finally understand I was an alcoholic, you gave me the answers I've been looking for all my life of what was going on with me. My life was unmanageable. I mean, I wasn't trying suicide because life was a bowl of cherries, people. I was 3 years old and didn't know how to handle anything, and I drank for courage, and I was a scared little girl inside. And I looked really good to the parents that came up because I had to be the teacher, right? And I was always afraid they'd figure out that the kids were older than I was. In fact, I relate with Judy Garland. When she was interviewed on television, she says they might find out, and I knew what she was talking about. So I didn't understand how alcohol played a part in that for several years. I was pretty dense when I got here, to realize that if you take a drug, you're going to be irrational, and you have a drugged consciousness, and you can't think straight. And of course, I'm already in a mentally ill alcoholic family, so there was no functioning things to fall back on, no tools or answers. So, you know, my life was definitely unmanageable. I'm a 3-year-old trying to make it in an adult world. And so came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I didn't know I was insane. I mean, I've gone through 7 years of college at this point. How could I possibly be insane, right? I taught school for 30 years. How can I be insane? We have 2 cars in the driveway, you know, 2 lovely children, and we look really good in the community. I went to church, you know, I took my kids to Sunday school, and we looked good. I thought was sanity. What happened inside the house was another story, of course. Talk about insanity. Even though there wasn't any drinking or prescription drugs when we went into recovery, if he didn't want me to go to an AA meeting, there was a price to pay. And I was finally learning to think for myself. And I knew in my heart when God would say that you need to get to a meeting, and he would be in a rage sometimes because we had a business, and he didn't want me to go to a meeting. And the first time I went against his wishes, I came home and got a broken tailbone. This is called sobriety. And I have not relapsed over these things. The next time I went against his wishes and went to an AA meeting and came home, I pulled in the driveway, but I didn't want to go in the door. You know, I didn't have anywhere else to go. So I went inside, and he's chasing me around the house. And I get cornered in our son's bedroom. And he'd already jumped over a king-size bed to strangle me. The little twin in my son's room was no deterrent. and I am scared spitless. And God literally stopped time and kept him from harming me, stopped him from being able to move closer towards me. It's really the story has a lot more detail to it, but the bottom line is the silent voice inside said to pray for him. And I said, God forgive him, for he knows not what he does. God bless him. And time still stood still. So I said it again. God forgive him, for he knows not what he does. God bless him. And the voice said, now you can leave. And I says, you got to be kidding. This is a tiny bedroom, and he's standing right there. I got to walk right by him to get out the door. This is, So angels literally took me out of the room. And he never touched me again. I found out that if you send love to people, they're not going to hurt you. What was happening is I was trying to protect myself and keep myself safe, and that's like an attack to somebody else. You're not sending love, you're sending out your fear. You're projecting out fear to them, and that's like an attack. I might have just as well had a gun and shot it at him. So he would retaliate back, and then, of course, it escalates, and it's called domestic violence. I married what I was raised in. It was familiar territory. So I started praying for him, and I was still going down and on, and I started getting to become empowered, and he couldn't handle that. I discovered that when somebody is a psychopath, they can't handle love. And I'm probably the only domestic violent wife from domestic violence where the man left, because he couldn't handle being around me as if I was sending love to him. He went the other way. He couldn't handle it. So that's a good way to, if you want to get rid of your enemy, send them love. Making a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God was really important, because I was in hell. And I was going through the steps in treatment, and what I realized was the way out of hell was step 3. If I moved into a higher consciousness of that love, then I could move out of hell. And so that decision, God cares for me today, and my family couldn't. They didn't know how to take care of themselves, let alone take care of me. And when one of my sponsors says, well, you're in the program now, you can take care of your own needs. I didn't even know what a need was when I got here. So I had to learn a lot. I've had to learn a lot. And thank you for the 4th step, because what I know today is those are all the things that caused my trouble. I was an immature little 3-year-old trying to make it in an adult world, and if I can identify all that immaturity, all that anger, little kids are angry and throw temper tantrums. A resentment's a temper tantrum. It ain't going your way. And so I was, of course, trying to control everything. I had to give up my anger today. I can get disappointed and upset, but I try not to get angry. I can handle it in better, loving ways today. And so step 4 showed me how those things were actually working against me and keeping me immature and actually causing my difficulties. So my sponsor in step 5 was able to show me, it says in the doctor's opinion, we have to separate the truth from the false. And I discovered I never lived in truth. I had no clue what was real, what was reality. I lived in this fearful fantasy, illusion type experience, and there was no reality to it at all. So 6 is I get to get rid of it. I get to grow up. I am ready to get rid of all those things, because I don't want the pain it brings to keep them. Why would I want to stay in pain? I've been there, thank you, and this is my way to get out of that. So by the time I got to step 7, I discovered that I could release those things to God and replace them with love and grace. And that's the psychic change. I don't have to be a fear-based person anymore. I can be a love-based person. I can come from God's love and share it with you. In fact, after my first 5th step, I was meditating and I said, it's empty. I got rid of the baggage, and what do I do to fill that? And I was told that I didn't have any self-esteem, and I needed to start learning that. And it's taken 30 years, but in my meditations this week, they said I finally have self-esteem. So, these things can happen. I have helped chair the 4-step workshop over at the South End Alano Club for 23 years now. And what I know today is that you can't have fear and faith at the same time. So I've never been afraid of being in front of audiences because I danced on the Moore Theater stage at the age of 3, 4, 5. So I've been in front of audiences or taught school and college and whatever. So, being in front of a group has not been a fearful thing for me. And dying isn't a fearful thing for me because I've nearly died 12 times. And that was a lot of stories behind that one. And so I needed to face my last fear a year ago. I had had a traumatic experience on an octopus in the 6th grade. At the top of the octopus, I got panicking so bad they stopped the ride and took me off. And I said I would never be on another ride like that again. And my boyfriend had a birthday and he wanted to go on the big wheel down at Seattle waterfront. And my first response was no, you're not getting me on that. And I called my spiritual teacher and she says, I can hypnotize you and you can go. Don't laugh, I do that for a living. So when she told me that, I realized I can go at meditation. It's the same thing as hypnosis. I can go into meditation and I can remove the fear, replace it with the faith, and I'll be in God's arms and I'll be safe. And so I went up in the Ferris wheel with him. And as we went, we didn't get there when we planned to because the traffic jam was so bad. So instead of going up in the sunlight, we were going up there later in the day, and I had my camera for pictures. And by the time we actually got to the top of the ride, this sunset came on. And it was orange, and the whole sky was orange. And the water reflected in the orange, and the windows of the buildings behind were all orange. And it was the most beautiful gift from God for overcoming my last fear. And orange represents Christ consciousness. So it was a really big victory for me. I discovered it's okay to be fearless because that's called maturity. As a teacher, there was a newspaper the kids would have. And one day it listed all the fears with the age you outgrow it. Now, I don't know where I am today, except that I know that if you outgrow your fears, and it says in the 3rd step in the big book, we will outgrow our fears of the past today and tomorrow. You are reborn. And that's how I feel I am today. I don't have any fear. I can go into being uncomfortable or having anxiety through going through changes of comfort zones, which I'm expanding. But as I've gone through the program, what I've learned is that all of this came from the ego's fear. Ego is edging God out. And the more I merge God in, the better it gets. And my unmanageability was the lack of God running the show. So as I released everything that was the obstacles to God, page 55 says, the great reality is deep down inside. I just have to uncover all the calamity that's covered it up. So 4th, 5th, and 6th, 7th gets rid of all my obstacles that stopped God working in my life. And then take responsibility for my life in 8 and 9. And then 10, I get to live in the now. I don't have to keep recreating all the past trauma and reliving it and doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. I get to have a new life, which is I get to create from loving responses instead of reacting from fear today. I get to create by loving responses. And what I send out is my reality and what changes around me. And so, it's amazing today how you move into being a love-based person. God brings all kinds of blessings. And what I want to close with, I always wanted a loving family because you've heard what went on. And a couple weeks ago, for the first time in my life, my family was sitting around the table. My daughter was getting ready to move to Portland. My son was there, which was a miracle. Some people know that story. And some other family members. And everybody that day had been helping others, supporting others, being there in harmony. And we were all functioning together as a family for the first time. And that's the gift this program's given me. Thank you for bringing what wonderful gifts that this program has to offer, and that I can be open with an open heart today and receive it and send it out. Thank you for your gifts.